We're going to be covering the kettlebell deadlift in this video. So what we're going to use for equipment, the kettlebell of course, and the deadlift movement, this is going to be sort of like a good introduction into that hinging pattern. Really the goal of a deadlift is just picking up heavy weight, putting more force into the ground, lifting heavy weight off the ground over time as well. But then obviously we can use different variations of it depending on the goal. So in this case, what we want to do is really start to perfect that hinge form. The weight may not be too heavy, but we're trying to create tension in the right areas, making sure that we're focusing on how to create that hinge movement correctly, and then we're targeting the appropriate muscles. So generally we're going to feel a little bit more glutes, some hamstrings, depending on our range of motion, maybe some quads as well if we find that the knees track over. And then we're also making sure that we're pulling with those muscles and we're creating that extension, right, as we're standing back up and bringing the hip forward, that it's happening because of the concurrent use of our glutes, our hamstrings, the adductors, as well as the obliques, rather than getting too much into that extension and then ending up targeting the lower back muscles instead. So I'm going to show this from the front and the side view. Front view, just to kind of show you the setup first here, and I'll show you the hinge motion itself from that side view. So front view, generally what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to first find kind of where do I feel like my center of mass and balance is. So most of the time, for most of us, we're going to find it's going to be somewhere around that midfoot. So I'm going to think about trying to align that kettlebell and the handle in that area there. That way, when I do go into my hinge motion, my arms pretty much end up at the kettlebell and the bar in particular itself, so the handle there. So coming into that side view, what we're going to see is that hinge motion. I'm always going to think about my setup the same way I want to execute every single rep, so that intent is there right from the beginning. So in my setup, once I have my feet in position, generally about hip, maybe about shoulder width apart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by reaching my hand out in front to create a nice stack position of the rib cage and the pelvis. I don't want to be already in a too flat position or overly extended position. Once I have that reach, I'm then going to focus on that hinge motion. So as my arms reach forward, my butt pushes back, my chin stays slightly tucked, and I'm trying to maintain that neutral spine throughout, not ending up again too rounded or overextended. And if I get a good hinge position, now this will vary based on our ability to move our hips, I should basically end up at that bar without being here or here, right? And so we're really kind of thinking about where that hip is in relation to that shoulder. I don't want it to be pretty much parallel or in line. I want that hip generally is going to be a little bit lower than the shoulder itself. So once again, we get into that hinge, weight shifts towards the heels. I may feel like my toes want to come off the ground, but I'm not going to let them. Chin stays tucked in to maintain that neutral spine. I take a nice deep breath of air into the core, creating that tension using the help of that diaphragm. I push into the ground, squeeze the glutes and hamstrings, a bit of the adductors as well. I come up to my tall position. Here, where we want to finish, we don't want to end up here. We're looking too high up. That's going to promote a lot of extension. We're likely going to shift that tension into the extensors in the back itself. I want to stay in this more compressed position, and then as I hinge back, I'm going to allow that same motion to occur, but pushing back. You can see the arms are just holding that weight, and it just travels in that straight line. Once again, grip tight, chest engaged. I feel that tension in my hammies and my glutes as well. Core is engaged. Extend, tight core, sit back into the hips. Now one more thing I want to show as well is positioning of the knees. Now we do want to create and learn to create tension on the adductors and the inside portions of the hamstrings without letting the knees collapse in. So if we find that we're just in this position here, we may need to slightly open the hips so the knees are aligned, right? So my kneecaps aren't coming in towards each other. I'm not feeling my feet also overly pronate there. So what I want to do is I want to find a little bit of open hips without pushing the knees too far out. And then again, when I do come down into that hinge, you can see I'm not forcing my knees out, but I'm also not allowing that position to cave in, but I am creating tension just by generating a bit of squeeze in those muscles. Now that is something that will take a little bit more time and practice to make more intuitive and more obvious, but key thing is don't allow your body to be loose. So our goal is to put a lot of force into the ground, especially when we go heavier. Nice strong push, breathing in, exhale. That is the kettlebell deadlift.